Welcome back to Distance Learning with Mr. C. Today's interactive read aloud is JigJabe by Jordan Norland and illustrated by Kadir Nelson. We have a great big pear tree in our yard down by the river. Papa J planted it there in slavery times. That tree doesn't give any fruit now, it's too old. But Mama Mary says that sometime after it's gotten a good rest, little white flowers blossom on it in the spring. That tree has probably forgotten more of the world than most folks remember, Mama Mary says. And on days when the wind blows and whispers that only bees can hear, she tells me a long, long time ago story, like the one about how freedom came to the slaves of Plenty Plantation. A long, long time ago, when young Addie was a house slave on Simon Plenty's plantation, she had to clean out the big house, but what she loved to clean out was the river. And when she went fishing, she made sure that everyone got lots of fish to eat, not just the head and tail neither. Now, Mr. Plenty loved his catfish, bass, and brim. He loved them baked, or poached, or cooked all together in spicy bayou fish stew. But he especially loved them fried, just like the way Addie's cousin Sweetie Belle fried them. One day, early in the spring, Mr. Plenty awoke with a powerful hunger for fish, so he sent Addie down to the river to fetch some. By midday, Addie was mighty vexed. She hadn't gotten a single nibble on her line. If her luck didn't change soon, she'd be facing Mr. Plenty, who was both angry and hungry. She tried not to think about which was worse. Then Addie saw something bobbing in the water. It was a wicker basket. It got caught in the roots of a fallen tree. Addie ran downstream to catch up to it. The little boy, about 5 or 6 years old, just sitting there smiling up at her. She scooped him up and set him on the ground. In the bottom of the basket, where he'd been sitting, was a plump brown pear as golden as the noonday sun. "Here," said the boy, "for you, for fishing me out of the river." Addie took a bite and sighed. "This must be the fruit of heaven," she said. "What they call you?" "Jabe," he told her. When Addie had finished that pear, Jabe dug a deep hole with a stick, dropped the seeds into it, and covered them over. Then he brought water from the river to soak them. "They want to grow," he told her. Well, Addie thought it is spring after all. Jabe looked at Addie's fishing poles. Then he looked at her empty wagon. "You fishing?" "Supposed to be. But I can't catch nary a one." Jabe leaned over the river, cupped his hands around his mouth, and called, "Fish, fish, where is you, fish? Jump to the wagon like Miss Addie wish." Suddenly, the earth began to tremble, the river began to roil, and the air was filled with fish jumping and hopping, flying right into Addie's wagon. Jabe opened his little boy mouth and laughed a big, man-sized laugh. Now, if you'll stop for page 7 class chat, question is, what are your first impressions of Jabe? What do you think about him? What's going on with him? And then come back to the book when you're ready. Mr. Plenty took no notice of Jabe that day. It was hard to see anything over the piles and piles of fish. Come nightfall, with the chores all done, and the big house finally settled and quiet, Sweetie Belle and Addie took out to collect the fish that she and Jabe had hid from the folks in the quarters. Laying boards, tops, and barrels, the women folk set a fine table, and there was no hunger around that night. Jabe sat next to Addie. "This is the first little boy fish I ever did catch," she said, and she laughed. And when she told them about the wonderful way Jabe had caught all those fish, hauled them right out of the water, he did. Folks oohed and awed, and Jabe sat up tall in his seat. That spring was the growingest spring anyone on the Plenty Plantation ever remembered. Cotton plumped up so quick it seemed to blossom overnight. Corn stalks learned to scrape the sky, yielding foot-long ears of sweet, sweet corn. Chick hatched by the dozen. New foals were ready to saddle and break at 6 months. Jabe was growing too. By May, he left his boyhood behind and showed no signs of stopping. By June, he was a full-grown man and had the strength of 50. He could weed a whole field of soybean before sunup, hold a back 40 by midday, and mend 10 miles of fence by sunset. Life in the quarters just didn't feel so burdensome with Jabe around. Suddenly there was time for leisure, but this enraged Mr. Sorensen, the overseer, just as much as it satisfied the slaves. Addie spent her evenings at the riverbank, visiting the tree she and Jabe had planted. From night to night she could hardly believe her eyes. One day it was a sprout, next the sapling. The day after that it was a young tree, full of pretty white blossoms to decorate Addie's hair. In another blink of an eye, that tree looked as if it had been rooted there forever. Its mighty trunk made Addie feel safe. She went to it often and stayed with it late. Its branches arched out over her, full of luscious pears. And there, shining between them, the North Star sparkled overhead. No sooner had the seed leaves appeared than long rows of fluffy white clouds spread over the land. The cotton was ready for harvesting, and Jabe was ready for the cotton. One night, by the light of the moon, he set out alone for the field. He moved so fast, the fields looked like a snowstorm in the dead of winter. So much cotton was flying around that come morning, when the sun rose up, it couldn't shine through. So the cock didn't crow, not an animal in the barn stirred, not a single person in the big house or the quarters knew that a new day had dawned. Everyone slept late. By noon, Jabe had finished the picking, and the sun blazed down on the row after row of bags stuffed to overflowing. It was such a plentiful harvest that no one noticed that the sacks had been carried off to the quarters, with enough cotton in them to replace every corn husk and every mattress. But as the slaves looked forward to the first soft sleep of their lives, Mr. Sorensen was boiling over. With Jabe doing all the work, just who was he supposed to oversee anyway? He aimed to break Jabe, but Mr. Plenty wouldn't hear of it. "I don't want anything interfering with Jabe's calling," he said. "You're not to lay a hand on him, you hear?" So Mr. Sorensen stayed away from Jabe. But when he found Pot Tim whistling as he worked in the stables, he whipped him good. It was a good thing for Mr. Plenty that all that cotton was picked, because the very next morning a twister blew in bad. It lifted full-grown trees out of the ground and tossed them around like they were no more than dry leaves. It picked up the chicken coop and chickens and all and carried it to the middle of the cow pasture. It tore the roof clean off the barn. Not a shingle was left behind. When that storm stopped, suddenly as it started, Mr. Sorensen said for Pot Tim to mend the barn roof. but he was nowhere to be found. Pot Tim had vanished, and his wife Molly and their 2 children with him. Mr. Sorensen was certain they'd escaped under the cover of the storm, and he set out with dogs after them, but the hounds never picked up a scent. "Twister's starting to carry families off too," Sweetie Belle mocked behind the overseer's back. "Sure enough strange," Jubal agreed. "Bet they's in Ohio by now." He chuckled and slapped his knee. Addie listened to them all and pondered their words in her heart. She thought about the day she'd found Jabe and how he'd filled her wagon with fish. She thought about how fast every little thing had been growing. And she thought about that pear tree with a North Star shining through its branches. Suddenly, Addie gasped. "Jabe took Pot Tim to that pear tree," she whispered, but no one heard. So please stop and answer this question. Why does Addie think Jabe took Pot Tim to the pear tree? And come back when you're ready. Mr. Sorensen set Jubal and Lester to repairing the barn roof, but Jabe came along with them. How his hammer flew! Seemed like Jubal and Lester had never even had to hand a nail to him. They tried to help, but the truth was, Jabe didn't leave them much to do. The roof was raised long before supper time, as tight and secure as a drum. Mr. Sorensen, who watched tight-lipped all afternoon, fumed. Though he couldn't find no fault with the roof, and he didn't dare find fault with Jabe, he could let loose on Jubal, and he did. The next morning, the heavens opened up. Rain poured down so hard it seemed it would wash away the topsoil clear down to the core of the earth. When it stopped, it looked like some of the slave folk had been washed away too. Now Lester and Sweetie Belle were gone, and so was Jubal. Mr. Sorensen ordered the cabins torn apart, searching for them, but no one was found. Not even a footprint, not a trace. "Sure is mighty strange," said Tessie. "Wasn't no wind that took them away," Hazel added. "Weren't no flood neither," Jim clicked his tongue. "I bet they went the way of the river, and water washed their footprints away." "Nah," said George. "The river runs south. Runs too fast to follow nohow." "Maybe Moses came in the night," said Maisie. "Jabe took them to that pear tree," Addie whispered. And this time, people listened. But in spite of twisters and floods and missing slaves, the Plenty Plantation was as good as its name that summer. Speckled cows spotted the field and gave enough milk to fill a river. Sheep produced enough wool in one shearing to knit a blanket big enough to cover the entire farm. The barn was bursting at its seams. 3 more smokehouses had to be built to handle all the meat. The larder in the big house was crammed so full Addie could hardly open the door to stuff in more. Then came the day when Susie, broken-down old plow horse, was to be put down. But when Mr. Sorensen went for her, Susie was gone. Folks thought she had walked off to die on her own. But she turned out that afternoon grazing beneath a pear tree. Now, there was nothing so odd about that. What was odd was that Susie had gotten hold of her youth again. She whinnied and pranced like a new foal. Somehow she changed from a tired old workhorse into a young filly ready for a race. It was George who found her and brought her back, and his story spread through the quarters like fire set to dry kindling. When Mr. Sorensen asked where she'd been, George just told him, in the woods. Mr. Sorensen knew that there had to be more to it than that, and he was certain beyond a shadow that Jabe had something to do with it. And who brought Jabe to the Plenty Plantation in the first place? Addie, that's who. If there was magic afoot, then Addie had to have something to do with it. Now I want you to answer this question. What does Jabe always do? And what does that suggest about the message of this book? Two questions. What does he always do, and what does that suggest about the message of this book? Neither Mr. Sorensen nor Mr. Plenty wanted anything to do with spells and charms, so Addie was put in chains and locked away in the smokehouse. "Come morning, I'm selling that gal away from here," said Mr. Plenty. First thing next morning, Mr. Sorensen went to her. When he undid the lock and opened the door, the chains were left lying empty on the floor, and Addie had disappeared. Mr. Sorensen was fit to be tied. He searched the barn. He searched the quarters. He searched the big house. He searched the entire plantation. Then he set out with the dogs. That was no avail. Like the others, she had vanished without a trace. Some said she was magic and flown right out through the smokehouse chimney. Some said she tunneled under the floor and made her escape like any mortal. But some looked out at Jabe chopping the wood and breathed the thought that no one would say aloud. Jabe took Addie to that pear tree. After a while, Mama Mary tells me, Jabe moved on. One day, he too disappeared from the Plenty Plantation, but he turned up at different times in different places throughout the South. And everywhere he did, burdens were lifted. Mama Mary tells me all stories, but the most wonderful one, she says, happened right here at our old pear tree. And on days when the wind blows and whispers that only bees can hear, I know she's right. So the last question is, if you could ask Jabe a question, what would you ask? And that was Big Jabe. Thanks for distance learning with Mr. C.